Soon. Melissa, thank you. Well, joining me now live, a Liberal MP, Andrew Wallace, and Labor MP, Alicia Payne. Let's get straight into it, guys, on the protests, of course, that we've seen this week in Melbourne and the broader discussion that started this in relation to mandatory vaccinations in the construction industry. Andrew, you told us last week that you have a background in this industry. The New South Wales government made it mandatory for the sector, Victoria making the same decision. What is your view? Is mandatory vaccination fair enough in certain industries?
Look, I think mandatory vaccinations are fair enough in some industries, but I certainly don't support it in all. You'd need to be able to demonstrate that there's a real need to be able to protect masses amounts of people. So frontline workers like doctors, nurses, police, ambos, fireys, those emergency service workers, people who work in retired, in the aged care facilities, absolutely no problems with that. But I'm very uneasy about mandatory vaccinations for, across the board. Now, that said, nothing excuses what we've seen in recent days in Melbourne. We've seen, construction workers holding up marching on the streets, holding up the Westgate Bridge. And then, of course, what we saw in the Shrine yesterday or the day before was just disgraceful. And they should be condemned for those actions. Over 60,000 Australians died in World War I, and the Shrine was built as a remembrance of that supreme sacrifice. Now, I think we need to get back to basics here, and I think it was actually quite poignant that standoff and those actions happened at the Shrine of Remembrance when we acknowledge that self-sacrifice that those 60,000 Australians made, and all we are asking Australians to do is to roll up your sleeve and get a vaccination. You're not going off to war. The stark contrast is absolutely almost unimaginable.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think, certainly the scenes that we've seen this week have been widely condemned. Alicia, on the broader matter, what's your view when it does come to mandatory vaccinations for certain industries?
Thanks, Danica. Yes, I think they are absolutely necessary in certain industries, and many industries before COVID have been very used to having mandatory vaccinations for other illnesses, such as in the healthcare sector. And I just want to join with others from Labor, the union movement, and with Andrew's comments now in condemning these horrible violent protests, and particularly using that sacred place at the Shrine of Remembrance. As we talked about last week in the construction industry, yes, there have been some restrictions and of course talk of mandatory vaccinations for them, but many industries at the moment can't work at all. And many industries do have mandatory vaccination, and nothing justifies these sorts of violent protests and this behaviour.
Absolutely. It's been appalling, some of the scenes this week, that's for sure. Look, let's move on to another matter. This week, the Anastasia Palaszczuk, the Queensland Premier, hinting that she could keep borders shut for Christmas. Andrew, she also made comments about why people would want to go overseas. Are you worried about a lack of ambition to get back to normal in various states?
Look, I think that I share these views with many fellow Queenslanders. I've lived in Queensland now for 28 years, and there's a great sense now that people just simply cannot trust Anastasia Palaszczuk. She's proven herself to be untrustworthy. She signed up to an agreement that she would open the borders, and relax a lot of these restrictions that people are currently undergoing at 70 to 80% double vax. Now, she's walking away from that. And now she's talking about, well, maybe 90%. It doesn't matter what the national plan says anymore. It doesn't matter that Victoria and New South Wales is opening up. She's not satisfied that that's good enough for Queensland. I think that the tide is turning in Queensland against the Premier because she is proving herself to be untrustworthy. If you make an arrangement, not just with your colleagues, with your state premiers and the Prime Minister, but more importantly with the people of Queensland, if you made that commitment, you need to stick by that commitment. If
Does
you
she
don't,
have a point, though,
I think
Andrew? Does she have a point, though, given that the high caseload in Victoria and New South Wales?
Well, we simply cannot, we're living in a fool's paradise if we think that we're going to keep Delta at bay forever. That is not going to happen. Now, if we don't lift at 80%, then when? Is it 90%? Is it 100%? She keeps on changing the goalposts here. And I think the people of Queensland are fed up with it. She needs to stick by the arrangements that she's made at the national cabinet level, but more importantly, with the pact that she's made with Queenslanders.
Alicia, do you think that the comments made by the Premier were justified?
Look, I think you can see where the Premier is coming from, because at the moment in Queensland, people are living almost normal lives, enjoying things that we here in the ACT, New South Wales and Victoria are not able to do as we're in lockdown. And I do sympathise with people who, I do understand that these border closures are very difficult for people and keeping families apart. My own family, my husband's family are in Brisbane, and we are really, really hoping to get there at Christmas as we do every year. They haven't, my parents-in-law haven't seen our very young children for many, many months now, and missing out on, that important time of their lives. And I know they desperately want to see them, as do we. But you can understand why the Premier doesn't want to open up and risk letting all of the freedoms that they have in Queensland at the moment go. The Premier's responsibility is to look after the people of their state, and the Prime Minister's responsibility is to look after the people of all of Australia. And you can see, when it suits the federal government to push the responsibility onto premiers, they do. And then when it suits them to blame them, they do. And in terms of opening up borders, what Queensland have done is investing in building their own purpose-built quarantine up there, which obviously is towards opening up more. Whereas even though that is a clear federal government responsibility, we have not seen the federal government step up to the plate on that issue. So Queensland is doing the work towards opening up, but you can totally understand the hesitancy at the moment.
Well, unfortunately, that's not quite correct, Alicia. The arrangement for the federal government to fund the building of a quarantine facility at Pinkenbar came before the Wellcamp one. So that's not quite correct. But look, I think people are simply, look, more than 1 in 5 Queenslanders were not born in Australia. And I've been doing some listening posts since I've been out of isolation in the last few days. And the really sad stories that we're hearing from people. I had a gentleman talking to me yesterday, would have been in his 60s, in tears for his son who was, who couldn't be with him. And that's just one of many stories that we're hearing. And the tide is turning. We've seen certainly Daniel Andrews change his tune on this issue. He's now very much in lockstep with the New South Wales Premier. Anastasia Palaszczuk is out on a limb here on her own. She is Queensland is going to become the hermit kingdom if we don't start to open up when she committed that we were going to open up. Well, she made that commitment. She needs to abide by that.
All right. Well, Alicia, just on that then, in regards to the comments, Anastasia Palaszczuk was talking about Tokyo. Is it fair to say, though, this isn't just about overseas travel? This is about reopening and reconnecting families with loved ones overseas?
Absolutely it is. And I'm, of course, very aware of the sorts of stories Andrew is talking about as well. There are people in very difficult situations separated from their families. And the state premiers have agreed to the national plan, but at the moment there are so many questions remaining about getting to the vaccination targets. For example, just today we've seen that the number of Pfizer doses that will be made available is going to drop significantly between September and October from what was promised. So I think while we're all looking forward to opening up, there is a question of, are we going to meet those targets? How are we going to meet those targets? And as I've said before, the Prime Minister needs to answer the questions around whether the TTIQ, the tracing and testing and quarantining systems are up to the task at the moment, and also whether our health systems are ready to take the increase in hospitalisations that will occur when we open up. So again, you can just understand, like, I know Andrew is from Queensland, but there may be many people who are very concerned about opening up with the cases, the number of cases and hospitalisations in New South Wales and Victoria at the moment.
All right. Unfortunately, though, we are out of time. It's been another busy afternoon with the situation in Melbourne at the moment. Alicia Payne, Andrew Wallace, thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks, Danica. Thanks, Alicia. Have a good one.